You know, the reason they like reading my stuff is that I've always got real-life examples to prove what I'm saying.
There's a lot of good people that listen to this podcast.
You know, other than God and my family, deer hunting would be next in line on my list of priorities.
From the bottom of our hearts, it's just fantastic and awesome to have the support that you guys are giving.
People ask me about expandable broadheads and love swings.
Chasing Giants with Don Higgins and Terry Peer. Brought to you by Osseo Camo, nature's most lethal camouflage. Follow along as Don and Terry discuss the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetail.
Welcome, everyone, to Chasing Giants, episode 108. Don, we are in the front of another live audience. This seems to be the trend for us this winter.
We are. Glad to have everyone here.
So we are at the first weekend of the master class here on the Higgins Ranch. We call it a ranch now.
You can call it what you want.
Whatever we want. So on the first master class, but I'm most excited about, is this your third time on the Chasing Giants podcast?
I think so.
Dr. Bronson Strickland is here giving part of his seminar for this week's master classes, and he agreed to join us on the podcast tonight to get down and dirty on deer management, especially as it relates to big bucks.
I'm going to do my best. First of all, I'm just impressed. I don't even know what this thing is.
Our
podcast is a laptop and two little speakers, and so you've got all this stuff here. I'm intimidated.
Someone a whole lot smarter than me told me that if we spent the money to buy this thing that has all the lights on it, we don't have to do any post-production.
Make you sound better, too.
No, I don't know about that. You can't, when you're dealing with us, there's not a lot of help, but what you hear with us is what you get. There's not a lot of edit except for the things we have to take out that Don says.
Happens once in a while, doesn't it?
Yep, and you have another guest again this week. Why don't you introduce that there, Don?
The other guest?
The other guest on the other side of you.
Oh, my grandson Wyatt. He's here with us for the second podcast. He's joined us.
Yeah, so, see, you get a round of applause.
Yeah.
Yeah, Wyatt was with us in Shipshawana, but if I'm not mistaken, we didn't have video for that episode. So that section of it was just a picture of Wyatt. So he gets to sit up here with us this week. I want to talk a little bit about the master class this week. We got a full house again today for the class tomorrow. We had people come in Wednesday night for the class Thursday. And what's special about this master class is I really think that we can define what we're trying to do in this two-day event in kind of three pillars. And you guys, if I say this wrong, you can jump in and correct me at any time. But if we identify chasing big bucks from a maturity standpoint, Don, you talk about all the time that a buck, once he gets 4.5 years and older, he acts different, he's a different animal, and to consistently kill him, you have to adapt to what his desires and where he wants to be is. So we think of it as the first pillar of this class is understanding why that buck is different and what he wants different than a normal 3-year-old as the first pillar. That's part of your material that you present here that we really don't get into the nuts and bolts on the podcast. The second idea is how to set up a property that caters to those desires of a buck that's 4.5 years or older. Right. As a second pillar. And then what's awesome about this coming full circle is Dr. Strickland comes in and says the third pillar of this curriculum is going to be in that property that we've set up, how can we manage the existing herd on that to get the best chances of a bigger rack? Not just the age structure that we're looking for, but with different techniques that he dives into. It's kind of a full circle of habitat centered around what nobody else in this industry is doing, and that's everything specialized to a buck 4.5 years or older.
Yeah, and it's really special to have Bronson here because he's one of the greatest minds in the whitetail world, if you will, and the fact that he has validated a lot of things I've been saying for several years. And he was doing the same thing in the South, and I didn't even know it until we had him on the podcast, and what I was just doing through common sense, I thought he was doing through science and proven with science.
That's a great point because Bronson and I had a conversation here Thursday. Was that yesterday? I guess that was yesterday. It all runs together. Yeah. But I asked Dr. Strickland, I said, there's a lot of whitetail consultants that get on the internet and social media and they make an idea or a claim or have a theory. I asked Dr. Strickland flat out, I said, in the academic world, do we have those same things? And do you mind sharing what your response was? I mean, it was quite amusing to me, because if you tried to do some of that stuff, it would.
Yeah. Well, someone would just say, prove it. I mean, that's the bottom line. You can't say something unless you have the data to back it up.
Because you're sitting in front of other PhDs and other people
Right.
that's done research. So
yeah, they would say, show me the data, prove it.
just like the hunting industry, right, Don?
You don't have to prove it in the hunting industry. All you got to do is open your mouth, and somebody's going to believe it.
Well, one of the things at the end of the segment Bronson was doing in his seminar yesterday, he was taking questions from all the audience, and I got a little bit of a chuckle because Don raised his hand sitting back there next to the cooler, and he raised his hand and said, "What's your opinion on the Doe Factory?" And I thought it was amusing. The whole place started laughing. You had a very serious response to it, though. I mean,
Well, I don't know what that is, so I took Don's question and answered it best I could.
so the theory of providing too much food or food in the summer, that we're going to have too many does there and not any bucks, and so we shouldn't plant food on a property in the summer.
Yeah, well, I fundamentally disagree with that. I think anytime you compromise nutrition, you're shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah.
So why would you not want the mothers of the bucks to be in the best condition they can be?
Yeah, and it falls, for those that will be in the seminar tomorrow, that falls really into that full circle of what we can do from a nutrition standpoint. I'm thinking back through my head of some key phrases that you brought up that I'm going to pick your brain a little bit in front of this audience, but most of all the podcast listeners. You made a statement about supplemental feeding yesterday, and you said, I'm paraphrasing, of course. If I get it wrong, correct me. You said that the guys that are feeding corn aren't supplemental feeding; they're baiting. Supplemental feeding is a different ball game. I thought that was a fascinating comment. Do you mind talking about that a little bit?
Sure. Supplemental feeding, the goal of that, well, you typically have an assumption, if you want to do it, that you want to provide enough food that deer are going to get bigger. Right? So to do that, it is typically a year-long process. And you have to provide enough nutrition. And if you think about it, it's one of those, in hindsight, it ought to make perfect sense. You have to provide enough nutrition supplementally to raise the average diet quality of the entire deer population. And so by going out and just adding, number one, some food during the hunting season, well, that's not a supplemental feeding program. And then if you're only doing, say, a high energy food, the most common being corn, deer love corn, deer are attracted to corn, but don't kid yourself that you're supplementally feeding if you're just doing it during the hunting season and you're just using one particular type of feed, in this case corn. You're baiting is what you're doing.
Right.
Deer are attracted to that food, so it's very effective to bait, but don't kid yourself that you're doing something good to raise the diet quality of the population and expect the deer to respond.
Yeah, when you went through your segment in your seminar yesterday about actual data, like the academic world likes to live in, not the myths and assumptions that we have in the hunting industry. The data that you showed about research done with supplemental feeding and what that alluded to for not only antler size but herd health was fascinating. I mean, I was watching the crowd more than I was watching you, and everybody was kind of sitting there with their jaw down. So overall, I thought it was just a fascinating element to add to the master class, Don, because it really brings back full circle. You talked about, Bronson, yesterday. We spend all this money on leases, properties, archery equipment, camouflage. We're sitting in this building right now with all the Chasing Giants sponsors over here on the table and their brochures, and all these people here get discount codes for everything that they can do to save money. All the money that we hide from our wives that we actually spend on deer hunting.
I don't do that.
You don't do that?
No.
We do. Except she's over there. You're busted, Don.
She doesn't care what I do. She lets me spend whatever I want.
The theme about this, and you can comment on it, Don, is we spend all this money and invest in it, but not making the right decisions about the bucks that we're harvesting has a major impact on what the long-term potential of the antlers. We're sitting here underneath 3 200-inch deer, and those are a very small percentage of the deer herd that are out there. But this element that Bronson's bringing to your class really ties all of that back together to see how can we really manipulate the strategies from the master class into long-term benefit of antler growth.
Yeah, and there's no other class like it, Terry, out there. Where else can you go and listen to someone with Dr. Strickland's credentials and then walk out and tour a farm where 2 200-inch bucks were killed, see the very tree stands where they were killed, tour another property where the third 200-inch buck lived. He was killed on the property next door. But, there's nobody out there in the hunting industry doing anything even close. And the fact that Dr. Strickland with his credentials would join us, for a master class, it just kind of validates everything that you and I have been pushing since we started the podcast.
Right. And, if there's always going to be the guys, and we haven't had any in the master class, but they say, but in 1994, I shot a 197. Those anomalies are going to happen, but with the data that you're presenting, it's factual, both from the captive and the wild herd, which I think is fascinating. You make sure to disclose a lot of that data and why it's important to have both,
right.
in basically a big science project. And then you have the proof in the pudding on the actual properties. Just a great experience. I'm excited for everybody who's here tonight to be able to sit through this tomorrow morning. We're going to take just a quick break. As you all know, Matthews Archery sponsors and has been a longtime partner of this podcast, and every week they sponsor a segment for Lester's Feet. They forfeited their right for us to talk about the technology and their archery equipment for us to focus on the foundation and the families that we have. But I think it's really special tonight that Don's entire family is here, including his mom and dad, which that's really, really special. But several months ago, you got on this podcast and actually asked for prayer for your grandson.
Right.
And I put your daughter, his mother, on the spot. And I think it's only fitting that while we have everybody here, I tell her to come up here for just a second. What's the matter? There's a very awesome, and why we want her to come up here is she has a fantastic, good update about her son. And today's episode that Matthews is bringing to us for Lester's Feet, let's just get an update on Don's grandson, if you don't care.
Hi, so I'm Andrea, and I didn't know I was doing this, and I'm not the public
She
speaker
found
of the
out
family.
literally 3 minutes ago.
Yes, I did. So bear with me here. So yes, I want to update you all on Walker, but mostly I want to glorify God for what we've experienced over the past 2 months. For those of you that don't know, he spent November and December with off and on limping, hurting, not being able to walk down our stairs of a morning. I'd have to carry him. He was using a wheelchair in the grocery store because of not being able to walk. He had an MRI at Riley Children's Hospital the end of December and was diagnosed with Perthes disease, which is basically degeneration of the head of his femur due to a lack of blood supply. We were told this is a long process, a lot of pain. It's going to be several years before he's better. We immediately, within, a week or two, kind of spread the word as far as at church, on the podcast, asking for prayers. And to our amazement, by mid-January, the majority of his pain was gone. We have expected him to have a flare-up or something in the pain to return, but he has had now 2 months of only occasional pain or trouble walking. I actually returned his wheelchair on Monday. The only thing that changed in the span of 2 weeks was the prayers. from so many people. I know we had to have had thousands of prayers coming in from all of the Chasing Giants listeners. The Cincinnati Children's Hospital that we ended up going to reread the MRI, and they noted that this Perthes disease that we were told he had was actually possibly a previous case, or it was healing. So we know that it is not just a coincidence that he went from being diagnosed in the beginning stages of this disease to then being told that it looks like he is possibly healing from it. He goes back in May for more x-rays and a checkup, but at this point we fully expect that he is going to be released to run, jump, play, everything like he's supposed to be able to do. So from all of us, really from the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much for all of your prayers. And if you'll just continue praying for a couple more months here, and we hope in May we can say that his x-ray is good and he's been released. So thank you all so much, really.
Some of the best news that we've heard in a long time. When Don told me about his grandson, I said I'd really like to talk about it on the podcast, and I think I texted Corey, her husband, as they were eating dinner one night and asked for permission, and he agreed. But I don't know. She did a pretty good job speaking there, Don. Maybe
she did. For not being a public speaker, she did really good. Yeah. She might have to take my place one day.
Yeah, I know Don is very, very proud and thankful for the family that he has. Whether you believe it or not, he brags about each of you all the time when we're together. So, but I just thought it was fitting tonight. Lester's Feet didn't formally help, the family with anything financially, but it means a lot that everybody has been so concerned about him, because we get that question a lot when we're out. So I thought it was fitting that we get a little update from the family today.
Yeah, and I want to thank all the listeners as well for their prayers. Certainly appears like they've been answered.
Yep. With everything we've been through with this foundation in a short year, we talk a lot that we're just not surprised anymore. It's pretty amazing. Before we move on, I'll give you a quick raffle update. I don't want to take a lot of time. We were expecting to be able to announce on the podcast tonight the website for the raffle. It has been tested. It is functional. But I have one little paperwork thing that I have to get worked out to make sure we're in 100% compliance with e-commerce as it relates to the raffle. So I hope everyone understands that I'm going to delay it one more week. When we have prizes like a brand new Chevy truck that's been donated and $150,000 of prizes, I need to make very sure that we're in compliance with the IRS and all of our gaming laws. So with that, we appreciate everybody's patience on it, and we hope to have it up this coming week. So I'm going to ask the audience to go ahead and start making their way up here and get ready.
Osseo Gear introduces a premium line of bow hunting gear that is unmatched, pairing nature's finest camouflage with the best technological innovations. Osseo Gear brings whitetail bow hunters the gear they need to be the best at their craft. The unique camouflage mimics the intricate feather pattern of North America's greatest predatory creatures. Designed for invisibility, built for comfort, and engineered for function. Visit OsseoGear.com. That's ASIO Gear.com to start shopping. Osseo Gear. Prepare to be invisible.
If you listen to many of our podcasts, you know that minimizing human intrusion is the key to our success. Don Higgins and I have been utilizing the Quiet Cat bike for many years now. As shed season is here, turkey season is not far away. There's no better choice to navigate around your property than a Quiet Cat bike. Go visit Quiet Cat and use the word Higgins to get a free trailer with any Quiet Cat electric bike purchase. I need a drink. Does anybody have can somebody bring me? Oh, there it is. Oh, yeah. I'm glad we got video this week. Hey, like my cup, Don.
Oh, beautiful. I almost feel like I'm in for some kind of a joke here.
No, not really. I just thought it was hysterical. Ann found it somewhere, and we thought it was funny. Especially
for a guy like me that don't even drink coffee.
No. couple weeks ago, I wore a Higgins Delks 2022 election shirt that I had made, so why not have a coffee mug that has your name on it?
Nice.
I thought so. All right, so we got our first question. As I sip my water out of for those listening on the podcast, my Don Higgins mug that I got here. Wait, you like my mug?
Love it.
Very nice. You think we could sell some of these?
No.
Okay.
So I'm Mark Jackson from Indianapolis, and a couple questions, if that's okay. Wondering about, we're converting a 20-acre field in the bottom of our property. We planted a bunch of apple trees, chestnut, some persimmon, and there's saplings. They're in tubes. Grass is growing up real bad, the weeds. I didn't mow it last year. And I was thinking about mowing it and planting clover. And I didn't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea.
Is that a question for me or Dr. Strickland?
Whoever.
I think it's a great idea. Clover's a legume. It'll put nitrogen in the soil. Those trees will benefit from. It'll also keep the weeds down. And it'll serve as an additional food source for those deer. So, great idea.
Thank you.
You want to hear something funny about this, though? Steve Shields, our camera guy, has the same situation, and Don actually had about a 40-minute conversation at breakfast this morning about putting legumes underneath of fruit trees in his yard at his house to attract deer.
Perfect.
Yeah, there you go.
Second question, Don, you would know this just because you know our property. We have a real long, our property is rectangular, and the back side is cornfields. One side's a river, the other side is our neighbors. And we're trying to put minimal intrusion on the property. We're trying to identify the right entry-exit trails on the property that we can get some stands on. And so we're doing some scouting in the winter. You can tell which trails seem to have an awful lot of doe activity. And I'm just looking for a little advice on how to pick the right trails and how to scout it a little better.
Well, it all starts with access. If you don't have good access, you don't have a good stand. And that's the big issue with a lot of my clients. I see it on a daily basis. You go onto their property, and they've placed their stands based on sign. They see the beat-down paths, the rubs, the scrapes, and whatever, and they think that's the place to hunt. That's the best place on the property. I got to have a stand here. But there's no good access. So they go in and they try to hunt that spot, and in the process they push the deer off, and they never have a chance to kill them. The good thing that your property has about it is multiple access points. I know we came in, the second trip I was on your place, we came in from the backside and went around. And so if I remember right, you've got access from both the north and the south. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's as good as it gets. You just got to be disciplined to give the deer the heart of the property, because as long as those deer stay on your property, you've got a chance to kill them. If you go in and try to hunt the place in the middle where you see the most sign, most of the time you're going to end up bumping those deer off of your property, and they're going to stay elsewhere, and they're going to become 10 times harder to kill. Yep. So, just stay on the edges where you got good access. Don't push the issue. If you get a good buck staying there, you're going to get him sooner or later on the edge. But that's a whole lot better than trying to rush into the heart of the property and get one or two good hunts, and then you've ruined it for this whole season.
Yeah.
It's a great experience here at the master class, because just here on your home farm, he's identified trees that he can have access to, and then change the habitat to make sure the deer movement is close to those stands versus taking the stands to where the deer movement are. He's done it with, things bringing in like a piece of fence. He's done it with miscanthus. You're going to be able to actually go to those stands and see them tomorrow. So finding the right place that you can access and then adjust your habitat to match up with it. You'll be able to see it a lot tomorrow.
Awesome. One final question while I'm standing here. We had a real nice buck we were after last year. He stayed on our farm pretty much all season, and we didn't see him. We didn't hunt early in the season to keep the pressure off the property, and then he got killed on a neighbor's property. So my question is about hunting more early season instead of waiting longer. If you've got any general advice on what we should consider to do that.
Absolutely. In just recent years, I've discovered how important those October cold fronts are. when you get a cold front that comes in October, you hunt it just like it's the middle of the rut. And get out there and hunt morning and evening. And for years, I've told people not to hunt October mornings. That holds true for most of the month, but when that cold front comes through, you need to be out there. This buck right behind me here on the end, October morning buck, and cold front. A week later, I mean, it was October 30th, so, we was just a couple of days away from November. But when November hit, we got a warm front. And in November, early November, when the bucks are typically running like crazy, the activity was dead. That cold front at the end of October was actually better than November that year.
Bronson, it's an interesting topic that we don't talk about in your program, and I don't know if you want to talk about it any or not, but Don and I have said multiple times that the weather front is so much more important than moon. I don't know if you've seen any of that with your research and studies or not, but, if we're setting back only hunting when some moon phase is right, we're missing those opportunities to where we can really dial in and get that daylight movement because of weather.
Yeah, we really don't, and if there's one thing people have gotten more angry at us on social media is when we talk about the moon, and we just don't see any measurable effect whatsoever.
So it's something you've actually looked at, but there's been no data that supports anything behind it.
So it's based on, putting a GPS collar on a buck, and you're getting locations anywhere from every 15 minutes to an hour. And then we'll just look at the daily activity patterns of all of those bucks. And, there's always exceptions. One buck may do this, but we take the average of all those, anywhere from 40 to 50 to 60, individuals, and we just plot their movement. It's real simple to look at. You just plot their movement corresponding with all the different phases of the moon. And so you would think when the moon phase is changing, there's going to be increased movement or decreased movement. And the only thing that is reliable, which is nothing new, you already know this, the one thing that is reliable about when bucks are going to move more is the rut.
Very
simple as that.
All right. Don's other daughter here is a nurse, and I'm sure she can tell us some stories about the emergency room in the full moon, but outside of that, we'll leave to the next question here.
Amos from Ohio. And Don, you've been talking already about how I think it was 2012, EHD hit your farm, and it wiped out 70% of your deer herd. And the genetics were topping out at 150. Mm-hmm. After that, they topped out at closer to 170. So my question is, if I buy a farm, and I'm talking not just a small farm, 300 acres plus, and the deer have been high graded, or I guess that's what you would call that. And what if I were to go in and try to, now I live in a state where I can bait. So if I go in and we get guy and we try to kill all the mature deer, adult deer, you think the next generation that will be there will be a bigger class, or?
No, I don't. The short answer is no, because the young deer that you are left with are basically the same genetics as the older deer you took out. They're the offspring of those deer. I think what happened here in 2012 when we lost all the deer to EHD is just by chance. Some of the poor genetic deer died off, and just by chance some of the better ones were left. And I don't think it was all the EHD factor that caused the top end bucks on this farm to improve. I think it was the fact that the way we manage the buck herd. There's on an average year on this farm, there'll be, say, 6 bucks that are 3.5 years old. And, in most wild herds, the best bucks in each age class get shot first, the biggest. And here I've shot the smallest ones first. I've had guest hunters here. Man, of those 6, 2, or 3.5-year-old bucks, we try to kill the worst 4. And we try to leave the best 2 to grow up to be 5 and 6 years old. And I think that's probably had as much effect on the the top end bucks being much bigger than EHD did.
Good question, though. We ready for another one? Come over here just a little bit so he doesn't have to pan as far.
Alan from Ohio. My question is for Don and Bronson. You talk about does that have twin buck fawns. Shooting the doe gives the two buck fawns or one a better chance of sticking around. If a buck breeds a doe and she has doe fawns, do those doe fawns stay around and that same buck will breed those fawns? Or do the does get pushed off, or do they stay in a family group?
So the question is, do the doe fawns ever disperse, essentially? Right? Is I understanding the question correctly?
Yeah, the doe fawns disperse to prevent interbreeding with the same bucks.
That they usually do not. And something you're going to hear me say all the time, never say never, never say always. The studies that have been done and the data suggests that the doe fawns are not going to disperse. Now, sometimes when you do put a collar on a doe, you will have excursions and sometimes some shifts in their home range. But let's call it yearling doe dispersal is not a phenomenon like yearling buck dispersal. So on the average, they are going to completely overlap or be adjacent to their mother's home range.
All right, we need another question. Who wants to come up here? Don't hesitate. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Buy a Farm segment of the Chasing Giants podcast. This is Terry Peer. I'm here with Wayne Keller again tonight. Last time we had Wayne on, we talked about how popular online auctions are getting, and I believe Wayne has an auction that's coming up that he wants to tell us about tonight. Is that right, Wayne?
Yes, we signed up a new one this past week, 432 acres. Just right across the river on the Illinois side from Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And as frontage on the river, there's about 168 acres on the north side of the bridge, and then the balance of it on the south side. The south side tract has about 60, 70 acres of tillable ground in it. And this is one of those properties where the beachfront to the river is like a beach. It's just a big sandy beach on a lot of it. I didn't walk the whole thing, but a lot of these river properties have got a big nasty drop off into the river, but this one's not that way at all. It's like a nice ocean beach or something.
Interesting. So how's what's the details on the auction? I mean, I know it's going to be on the Buy a Farm segment. What did you? I apologize. Right. Did you say what county this was in?
Oh, this is in Alexander County. Like I said,
Alexander
right across from Cape Girardeau, Missouri. It's on I believe it's the 28th of April.
Okay.
Closes at 8:00 at night, and I walked the property. I haven't had time to bring trail cams up. Got, I guess, kind of late in the season to do that anyway.
Right.
But, it being a riverfront property and crop ground on the other side, no, it's loaded with deer.
Oh, yeah, it'll be awesome. Those river bottom properties are always really good during the rut.
Right. And I did get it. Go ahead.
And there's a lot of activity and ways that you can create habitat that's going to be able to hold deer also. So river bottom hunting is one of my favorites.
Uh-huh. Now, this one's a nice one because, it does have some a couple of sloughy ponds in it, but it's not all slough. It's a lot of, I don't know, I call it drier river frontage. You're not wading through muck all the time or anything.
Be great for the
duck
hunter,
one of the nicer
too.
Ones I've seen. Yeah, it would. It would, because there's some sloughs up next to the levee that would be good for duck hunting, and just a pretty piece of property.
Now, is this property going to be auctioned in one track, or is this busted up into multiple tracks, Wayne?
there's going to be two of them. They'll be offered separately, and you can combine them together if you want. But there's, like I said, I think it's 156 acres north of the 2 is south of the bridge.
Okay.
The access to it is off of the levee.
Gotcha. All right. Well, why don't you tell everybody how they can get in touch with you if they have more questions about this specific or any other real estate needs?
I can be reached at 800-357-4020.
All right, Wayne. So go out to Buy a Farm and check out this listing for an upcoming auction. And if you want to see or ask questions about the property, get a hold of Wayne and visit our friends at buyafarm.com. Thanks for having us again this week, Wayne, and look forward to talking with you in the future.
Thanks, Terry. Catch you later.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Hey, Travis from Highland, Illinois. My question pertains to access. So I hunt open ag similar to this, not quite as open as this. Many times I'll pull into where I'm hunting, shine the light across the field and see eyes before in the morning going out. Mm-hmm. What is your strategy? Are you simply waiting for daylight, or do you have a strategy for getting access to your stand?
Typically, I do not wait for daylight. I go in the dark, and I can tell you that without a doubt, many times in the dark, I've walked in a wide open field. I've walked within 20 yards or less of deer. I don't think you spook them near as much in the dark as you do in daylight. So I don't wait for daylight. I go in when it's pitch black.
That's without a light, correct? No red light.
Yeah,
no
I almost never use a
across.
light going in.
Yeah.
Yep.
He's not walking in on West Virginia mountains hills either. It's open ag field that he's able to do that.
See, here's how I would have answered that question, Don. I would have said, if you know where you're going,
yep,
you can go in the dark and with a minimal headlight. If you don't know where you're going, I think you're going to scare more deer traipsing and bumping around than if you'd waited till you could see.
Well, more than once I've ended up in some place other than where I was expecting to be.
Well, a lot of that, too, is your style of hunting now is you're not going deep into that cover either.
Yep.
And the students here at the master class will see that tomorrow when we're walking over those open ag fields. You know, you're not going down into a big pinch in the middle of a big section of timber to try to find a specific tree and fumbling around tripping over old logs.
Right.
Your style of hunting has really adapted to hunting perimeters and bringing the deer to those pinches to where we can get in and out. So needing a big spotlight on your forehead isn't required. So good question. All right. He's coming up with a notepad. I think he's got maybe
a whole list
more
of
than one.
Trey Hutchison from Western Kentucky. Speaking of the buck fawn dispersal and your techniques of shooting the mother, do you think that Mel and Smokey were fawns from your farm?
That's a good question. No way to know for sure. Probably not, because I've not shot that many does here. Up until 2012, when we had the EHD outbreak, my approach was for every buck that we shot on this farm, we shot 2 does. If we shot 3 bucks, we tried to shoot 6 does. But then when the herd crashed in 2012, the state of Illinois did nothing to address that, and so as a private landowner manager, I had to take it upon myself, and we just quit shooting does. In fact, in the years since 2012, I think I've only shot 1 doe on the farm. She had twin buck fawns, and my son-in-law Corey shot one that had at least a buck fawn with her. I think that might be the only 2 does that have been shot here since 2012. So I would have to guess they probably were not born here.
Cool. Dr. Strickland, when do bucks usually go into their fall range? I have a buck for the last 2 years. It's kind of different. 2 years ago, he showed up on November 13th, and he was there the whole winter. And then this year, he showed up November 10th. And it was the same buck. He's still there, and I'm assuming that's his fall range. But
yeah, so what we see and what we're doing is, again, looking at when these shifts occur. And so first I'll say is that, believe it or not all of the bucks have this shift. And in fact, probably more than half of them do not, believe it or not. And so the way we kind of break that continuum up is that you have some that are completely solitary and they never even have excursions. That's a really, really small amount. You have a lot of bucks, again, probably 30, 40% of them are solitary. They never shift to a different home range, but they will have excursions, little weekend trips. And then you'll have the what we call mobile bucks, where throughout the year they are going to have distinctly different times of the year, completely different home ranges. And that may be a mile or two apart. It may be like one of our most recent bucks we've been studying. He crosses the Mississippi River every single year, and he does the spring and summer in Louisiana, swims back and does the rut in Mississippi. But when we calculate all of those up and kind of look at when the timing occurs for when these shifts, it's always before or during what we think the pre-rut period is, and then sometimes we'll see a little shift after the rut, post-rut and beyond. So I would think, I'm not positive on this, but I would say if you're getting close to the rut and he shows up, then he's probably going to be there for a majority of the rut.
Yeah, I feel like this is I feel like the rut starts early November, and this buck is showing up after like the second week of November, and he's there.
Yeah,
all year. And I'm assuming he leaves sometime in the spring. So it's kind
and
of
I
weird.
wish I knew why they did.
Yeah,
you know, that's the
it's
Nobel
different.
Prize is waiting for
I have no
some
idea where
nerd
he
like
summers
me.
or anything.
I don't know why they do it.
Terry, I got a question for you.
Oh, boy.
We both live in Kentucky.
Yep.
If you could rewrite the season dates and hunting regulations in Kentucky, what all would you change?
Just we're talking season dates.
Season dates, hunting regulations,
all
baiting,
regulations.
supplemental feeding.
I think that supplemental feeding is great. I don't like that we can do it and hunt over bait piles. I think that promotes too many younger bucks being shot. And it's like they talk about in Ohio, if you're not doing it, you feel like you're, losing to the neighbors that are, so you get sucked into it even though you don't like doing it. But I think, right now I believe there's just a short window during turkey season where we have to pull our feeders, but we're able to supplemental feed the entire year outside of that, which I think is a fantastic approach to herd health. We'll talk about that a little bit tomorrow and put some, true facts around that. I think the best thing going for Kentucky is it's a 1 buck state. I think that needs to stay the same. But Kentucky, I think, could be just as good as any state in this country if we would move rifle season outside of the rut. We have 3 weekends. I think it's 16 days basically, 14 days of high-powered rifle season that starts the first weekend in November. And I gun hunt some, but if we would move that out of the rut, started around Thanksgiving, even if you wanted to run it that long, I think it would be fine. But I think that we would have a shot at getting some better age structure. For Kentucky to be as good as what it is now and having a high-powered rifle over 3 weekends in the heart of the rut, that tells you that the state could be phenomenal. But it's just whether our state is going to give in to making money from the fish and wildlife, or they're there to get the best deer herd possible.
And then what about the crossbow season? Would you shorten it, or would you leave it how it is?
I think we do have we're not full crossbow all year.
It's 2 weeks after bow season, I believe, and then it goes all the way.
There's one in October, I think.
The crossbow season?
Yeah.
It start
October 1st, maybe. I don't know.
It's a mid-September when it starts for us in Western, and then it goes all the way through January.
I don't have a problem with crossbow, but I think there needs to be a dedicated season for it. The way the technology is developed in it, it's basically a rifle at this point. If that helps get young people, women, kids involved in hunting, but we open up the first weekend in September to let someone use a crossbow that entire time, I think probably does the same thing as a gun season in the middle of the rut, and probably anything that's going to promote younger bucks getting killed, I deviate away from those. But I have no problem with crossbow, but I would like to see it not go the entire season, if that makes sense.
So, Terry, I would challenge something you just said.
That doesn't surprise me.
So if you think about in the Southeast, boy, it would be great if we only had 3 weekends of gun hunting.
Right.
I mean, we go for 2.5 months of gun hunting.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter if the state agency may even propose to the hunting public and say, we would really like to trim it up. We would like for it to be 2 weekends. It would never pass. Mm-hmm. You would never get support because the hunters would not want it.
Right.
So I don't think it's a biological or government in any way trying to.
It's always the government's problem on this podcast. We always blame the government.
Well, y'all can. In this case, I'm not. I'm going to say
I think that there would be more fallout from the hunting community
to
move that rifle season now that we're used to it. The majority of our rifle hunters would have an absolute fit that they weren't being able to hunt in the rut. But those are the same guys that also say, I want to kill a 200-inch deer. You can't have your cake and eat it too.
That's exactly right.
That's the problem. Everybody,
that's always the problem.
You got to leave my rifle season during the rut, but I want to kill a booner every year. Those two things don't align. Yeah. Don, you can talk a little bit about the state of Ohio. You don't really talk about Kentucky much, but a lot of the same things are prevalent between Ohio and Kentucky. But Ohio has, I think they did put in rifles, maybe straight wall rifle shells or rounds. Now, so I think, can you use a 450 and a 350? But that gun season's in basically what we would be late season.
That's the big difference. It happens after the rut.
So I just I don't think the hunting community in general, but the people that are in this demographic, listening to this podcast, coming to this class, getting Don or Wes to come to their properties, they'd be all for it.
They'd be all for it, but they're not average.
Nope.
They're like the normal hunter.
Yep. So, but I still think that there is a bias, and we criticize some DNRs pretty heavy with some decisions. Don just mentioned in 2012, I, as a non-resident in 2013, could have gotten 2 out-of-state buck tags in the state of Illinois after losing 75% or 80% of the herd in this local area. That right there is what we're talking about the hunting agency that works for the state looking at revenue instead of the herd health. I think that there is a lot of that goes on. But you're right, the hunting community is really what drives it.
Well, just to add to that.
How many weeks of hunting rifle season do you have?
Well, we go mid-November to the end of January 31st.
I think Georgia opens up like in October, don't they? Doesn't Georgia have like
they end earlier, correct?
Is anybody from Georgia here?
Hunters?
Oh, it's different zones by state? Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
All right.
But remember, the DNR or any state wildlife agency, they make recommendations. Mm-hmm. And then it is usually commissioners, or it depends on the type of decision, but commissioners then make the decision based on feedback from the hunting community, constituents, so to speak, and legislators as well. They're the ones that actually are the final vote to say yay or nay. So the DNR folks, they make the recommendation, and whether they're followed or not, it's up to commissioners.
Don, how do the Democrats play into this?
It's all their fault, I guarantee it.
See what you get with us.
Wow.
You can't win. Dr. Strickland's staying neutral in this one. I can guarantee you that one.
Thank you. My question is, it's for all of you. My name is Chris Hyatt from Weston, Missouri. And my first question is, have any of you ever thought about identifying a doe to take out of the herd so she doesn't pass on a specific gene, as opposed to, trying to shoot a lesser buck and to knock that out? But, maybe a dominant doe or a doe in an area that there's a trait in a buck that you want to get rid of. I've never heard anybody ever talk about isolating a doe.
I don't think you can do that. So I guess you got a couple things. Would there be I'll be a nerd here for is there some phenotypic characteristic, some shape, some look, whatever, that you could target? First of all, if you could do that, there's no guarantee that taking that individual out, just the same reason we talk about managing for genetics with buck harvest is futility. You can't do it. Dispersal and a lot of other reasons that we'll talk about tomorrow, it just makes it very, very impractical. And then trying to select some characteristic of a doe to do that, I would say, is even far more complicated than trying to target a buck. However, is there some behavior that a particular doe demonstrates that you find problematic for whatever reason? Absolutely take her out, but there aren't going to be any genetic manipulations from that.
Strictly behavior.
Yeah.
If you got a nanny doe out there that busts you every time,
yeah, it's that doe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna subject myself to ridicule from you with this one. He, the last doe that was shot on my property, ended up. We noticed in the probably around the July timeframe, I had one doe that was just covered in ticks. I mean, I didn't have an insect problem except on this one animal, and I don't know why. And it ended up getting where she would scratch a lot, this bald spot. And later on in the season, we noticed that she was just way, way down in weight. I mean, just skin and bones. If I would have, posted a picture of her, there would have been the CWD talk. We shot her. And the logic of that was, she's malnutrition or there's something wrong with her. Why do I want her taking up food or time with a buck to breed? And in that case, was I wrong by saying that's a buck or a doe that we want to take out because the health of that doe that year, we just didn't feel that it was worth wasting the resources on, so we shot her?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, as long as you're doing it from the perspective of there's not going to be any genetic improvement from doing that. But if it's just
a resource at that point.
Sure.
Okay. Does that help? Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, I was kind of hoping that we could identify maybe a doe that would throw a buck with one goofy side, and she was the dominant doe in the area. But I understand. Second question is basically for Don. I know Terry said that he didn't want to answer any political or religious questions, so
I didn't say I would.
You guys are very open about your faith, and I do appreciate that. And I just within the last year or so, I've had a little time to reflect. I've hunted 1 year longer than Don, so I've had a little bit of time to reflect on: is this truly my passion, or is it an idol in my life? And I just wanted to know if you had any insight on how you keep things in perspective, Don.
Well, how I keep things in perspective is this lady right here. She helps me.
A round of applause for Robin in the room.
Yeah. No. When I was younger, I probably didn't have. I know I didn't have my priorities in order, but I hope in recent years I've got them, in much better shape than I did. I think there's a saying. We've heard seeing is believing. But you can turn that around. Believing is seeing, and once you start believing, in your Savior, it becomes very obvious. You can't mess it, and the stronger your faith, the more He'll reveal Himself to you. And I guess my faith has just gotten stronger in recent years, and He's revealed Himself more to the point where I have absolutely zero doubt. So that helps immensely.
I think that we all have stresses in life, right? We all have families, we all have jobs, we all have careers, we have governments. See, I work it in everywhere.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's anything wrong with having hobbies. I don't think there's anything wrong with having passion with extracurricular things. But I think God gives us the opportunity, whatever we're doing. If you like going to car shows, if you like playing golf, if you're doing it as a way to make a difference in someone else's life, I think you're going to continue to be blessed. You look at the run that Don's been on the last you go over to his trophy room in his house, there's big bucks all over this big cathedral room wall. But when we're talking about the elite, I think there's two parts of that. Number one, the property that we were going to tour tomorrow and talking about the things that Bronson talks about with Gen X had time to implement. Number two, he's honed his skills. You guys are coming here paying for knowledge at this master class. There's a value to the knowledge that he's gotten. But the third thing that he's too humble to talk about is right about that time is when he also started really focusing on serving others. Okay? And he won't say that because he still admits that he doesn't do it. But taking people like myself under his wing and doing what he's done for me as a mentor over the last 14 years, he's being blessed by giving up more than what he's personally trying to receive. And I think God's always going to glorify that. If you go into anything with the intention, I'm going to help and better someone else, what's the saying there, Don? Best way to be?
If you want to be blessed, be a blessing.
All right. I think Robin should ask a question.
She knows all the answers.
Should we ask a question for Robin? Robin, did you know we've been talking about having you and Casey on a podcast just for an episode? The funny thing is, you all would say, we don't know what they're doing. They're never home. So I think the podcast would be what you guys are doing while we're gone all the time. So.
Hi, I'm Kyle. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. I don't necessarily have a question, but I did run across something the other day that the second I saw it, I said, if this doesn't have Don Higgins' name all over it, I don't know what does. So if you don't mind opening this up, and
my goodness,
you can wear it if you want.
Hey, I know nothing about this. Do I know anything?
Nothing.
See,
but it's right up your alley. It's something.
I may pass this on to Terry. No, it's just a T-shirt.
I have no knowledge of this whatsoever.
Oh, I'll be wearing that. The deadliest virus is the media. Absolutely. And the Democrats. I'll wear this. This is great. Thank you.
That'll be his church attire on Sunday.
For sure.
It's amazing that COVID just accidentally went away all of a sudden, didn't it? We were talking about that in the back earlier.
Well, that's a political disease.
Yeah. They had something else they wanted to talk about.
Yep.
All right, we got more questions. It's going to take us a second to get here. Bronson, how do you like the podcast thing? You've been a guest on a lot of different podcasts over the years, and you guys have your own. Talk a little bit while we're waiting on the next question about your all's podcast where people can get on and learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's called Deer University, and I guess it's different than, I think so. I think it's different than most podcasts in kind of the hunting space, is that it's geared more about biology and management versus hunting. And for one reason, Steve and I don't hunt as well as you, Don, so we really don't have good stories to talk about. But that's kind of one of the facets of what we do, is we try to do research that's meaningful to managers and hunters, and then we have a passion to make sure we get that information out to people so they can use it, and that's what it's about.
So where can they find that at?
I think all the platforms they can find your podcast.
Yeah.
So all the major.
But you guys have a website that it also streams from too. What is that?
It is. It's Libsyn. Libsyn is our host, I guess.
If you are you putting the plug-in on the Deer Lab website also? Can you get to it from there?
Not easily.
Okay.
Not
so your best thing is just go to your podcast platform and search it by name.
Right.
All right. Well, we got a question now. Let's.
Greetings, Mike Belisle from the thriving metropolis of Mankato, Michigan. You have to Google that, everybody. It's worth it. Trust me.
That's quite the introduction. So it must be. Yeah, I was getting ready to say he's from Michigan. He's going to hold a hand up and point to where on the. Yeah.
Speak to the hand, brother. Speak to the hand. So, actually, traveling down here from Chicago on business today with my traveling partner Jeff Lawton over there, and we were listening to 107 on the podcast, and there were some talking points about bedding areas, and where we live, and specifically my property is. You got some hardwoods that roll down in this kind of a swamp with conifers, pine and cedar, and you got a creek going through it, and then there's a big kind of a swale area, and then ag all around it, basically. And every year I seem to have struggles trying to pinpointing the actual bedding areas to kind of catch the funnels or the pinch points where they're moving in and out of those
those ag points, and just wondering what's the best way to approach defining those bedding areas to try to capture that buck. In our area, we're pushing 120 to 130, occasionally a 140. It's tough to get bigger bucks up when there's a lot of pressure, and they shoot those 1.5 years quite regularly. But just trying to, if we see a 130, 140, we're going to pull the trigger, whether it's an archery or rifle. But really the question is, what can we do to kind of better define those bedding areas?
What I would do is I'd be going out in the snow and looking for those deer beds in the snow. That's a great way to find exactly where they're bedding. And specifically, you want to look for those single beds, not the cluster of, where there's a doe group been bedded, but single beds. Ridge points are a great place to start looking for buck beds. I don't know how rough the terrain is that you're in. I've been to Michigan twice this winter already, consulting on properties, and I know on those swamps that you guys got, a lot of times there's a higher finger with the oak trees that goes out into those swamps. Those are fantastic places to look for beds. But no matter where you're at, the key to finding buck beds is finding the place that has the least amount of human intrusion. And a buck will bed in a wide open woods if that's the safest place, or he thinks it's the safest place in his home range. But, looking for those beds in the snow would be where I'd start.
Steve Shields is in front of us running like 16 cameras right now. And this is the thing that Steve has the hardest time with Don making these videos that you guys enjoy on YouTube so much is, Don can go onto a property and say a buck's bedding there and he's going to go there. And his mind just works that way. But for us, it's like, well, how did you know that? What did you do? And what has hit home most of the time, he's been on properties that I hunt, and he calls it right every time. It's where that buck is going to feel the safest based on possible intrusion. And so far he's batted 1,000 every time he's told me where the buck's going to bed and where he's going to go. So the part of the one pillar. So Steve has a hard time drawing that information out to produce these videos for you. Don doesn't like talking that much, believe it or not.
I would add to that and just say creating cover as well, where you're going to steer the bucks to bed.
You could make them bed where you want them to, actually.
If you don't disturb them and pressure them, yeah.
So if you have a property, in other words, to apply that to a situation, you have a property that you have a lot of hunting pressure to one side of it, but the other side you don't. A theory there would be eliminate the cover on the side that has the hunting pressure, move your cover to the side that is landlocked with the area that doesn't have pressure, and try to get an access point off of that. So you can create that habitat to make them bed where you want.
Yep.
Amos again from Ohio. My question is, I had a 2-year-old buck there, and he's got growth. I don't know what you call them on his face, all over his body, and they mostly disappeared now when it got real cold. Is that something that is genetic? Is that something that
they black, or they just bumps?
Black. A lot of them come around the eyes, and the other deer act like he's a Democrat. They don't like him.
Well, that's because he is.
Oh, my goodness.
But the question is that genetic that I should be concerned about? Is it something that's going to come back or not? Or what causes that, I guess?
Yeah, it's called a fibroma, a cutaneous fibroma is the technical word for it. It's a wart. It's essentially just a wart, and it's never going to be a cause of mortality to the deer unless, and you've all seen these pictures on social media or somewhere where there's so many of them that it affects their vision or their ability to hear and eat. But oftentimes they will fall off as well. But it's nothing that's contagious and going to be spread from deer to deer. So it's really no concern from a management perspective. And you may not want to. You can even eat the meat. It is literally contained on the skin tissue and does not penetrate into the meat. So no problem there.
That's interesting because, after watching this deer, if he comes out to feed and he goes up to the other deer, they just kind of avoid him. And I wondered, do they know something that we don't?
Yeah, they know he's a Democrat.
He's the reason. He's the reason that I paid $5.50 a gallon for diesel fuel on the way here on Wednesday night. But Bronson, I want to follow that up with a question. What things? So if a deer is a buck specifically is suffering from something of some type of illness, it might not be a wart because you mentioned that might not affect a lot of things. The energy that deer is spending fighting whatever is wrong with him, whether it's an injury or whether it's a tumor or mass or insects, how does that relate to antler growth that year? Because in the livestock industry, when we see something that, sickness is healthy, the overall, there's other repercussions from that. How does that relate to a buck when they're sick or something's wrong with them?
It's just gonna, I hate to start saying it depends already, but it's gonna depend on the extent of the infection, the parasite load, etc. If it has to spend a lot of energy to repair itself in terms of healing, or if it limits its mobility and it can't forage like it normally would, that's going to come at a cost. Probably one of the best examples is going to be EHD, and everybody, especially up here, is familiar when you have a wave of EHD and the acute form of it, and it kills deer. What a lot of people don't know is that, and you see this in the South all the time, is that you don't have these big mortality events of EHD in the South because they're confronted with the virus at some level year after year after year. It's when it expands north and it affects deer that don't have experience or any immunity to the virus. But where I'm going with that is, so the chronic form of the disease, meaning I'm going to get really sick, and it could even do some damage internally, epizootic hemorrhagic disease, so hemorrhaging on the inside, affecting its rumen or something like that. You will often see some of the bucks that lived through the disease will have smaller bodies, smaller antlers that year, but they will typically recover from it the next year.
The specific buck that comes to mind, Don, if you want to talk just a little bit about it, was the fork tine buck, and the story behind that when not only did he have scours that one fall, but he had pretty much a compound fracture on his back leg. For the listeners, just give a little history of that buck that you ended up harvesting and kind of how he transitioned year after year, right?
Right, and that was not from EHD whatsoever, but from an injury. After he'd always had fork tines on his G2s, and
smaller G2s than Smokey, but frame-wise, he had a lot of similarities to Smokey as far as forks, always on his G2s.
Yep. And then he injured actually broke that leg right above the hoof. Our friend Kyle Harmon got video footage of him here hunting here one evening, and then the next year his rack was just totally different. He didn't have either fork G2, and his rack was not as big either. So
ended up having a flyer coming off his G2 that year, and you were able to take him after, was that a November hunt? I can't remember.
It was. I think it was November 4th.
We actually get to walk by the stand that you shot that buck out of tomorrow.
All right.
Okay.
Mark again from Indiana. I think this is for Dr. Strickland, but you guys might know as well. I have a daughter that's a big mushroom freak and does lots of foraging for mushrooms. We find a lot of mushrooms that have a single chomp out of them. We assume it's the deer. And so I'm wondering if anybody's ever done a study on nutrition, mushrooms, and for deer.
Yeah, I'm not going to say a study has been done specifically to look at mushroom consumption, but a lot of diet studies have been conducted to see exactly what they're eating. And mushrooms are always in there to some extent. And it's not like, I don't think they're going after them for we think the holy grail is crude protein. That's what we typically talk about. But there are a lot of other minerals, vitamins, nutrients, etc., that deer are seeking and that they need, and evidently, at least part of the year, mushrooms are providing. So yeah, they will consume a lot of them.
So I wonder, after they eat mushrooms, are they like tripping out and like their GPS navigate? They don't walk in straight lines or anything?
Depends on the mushroom.
Okay.
So they say.
I don't know. All right. Well, we got time for just a couple more questions if anybody's got any. Don, what did you what's your takeaway from the first class? You've heard Bronson's speech and material several times now, but what was the takeaway that you got yesterday when he's in front of the students that you've set up about talking about hunting bucks that are 4.5, 5.5 or older?
Well, you know, the first thing that I take away from these classes, I'm just shocked. I was going through the list of all the students a couple days ago, and we've got 124 students coming to these classes this spring, and they're coming from 23 different states. And Dr. Strickland from Mississippi is the 24th state. So we've got almost half of the United States represented in the classes this spring. You know, the thing that I probably noticed as much as anything was when Dr. Strickland was talking, it was like everybody was 100% focused on what he was saying. And, you know, as I've gotten older, I've quit reading hunting magazines so much. I still get them, but I guess I'm looking at the pictures. But I've started some time ago, I started reading these scientific studies put out by guys like Dr. Strickland doing radio collared research and such. And he's become, you know, one of my favorite biologists, whitetail biologists. There's just a short handful of them. And just to think that he would come here to my place and take part in this class, I consider it an honor.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to let you off the hook either. After sitting here listening to his material and walking the farm here, I know this is completely different country and a different, you know, class of whitetail. That's why people come to the Midwest.
Yep.
From down in the Southeast. You spent a good portion of the day in a video shoot talking about different things with Don. Any takeaways from his side about, you know, hunting specifically mature large bucks that are a takeaway for you?
Yeah, I was really impressed, and I don't know if Don remembers this, but after "Hey, how you doing?" I think it was, "Wow, you live in a cover limited environment," and I've seen TV programs. I've been to Google Earth. I know what the landscape looks like, but I didn't think it was cover was as limited as it is. And so that is just so starkly different. So where I'm at, and you can kind of generalize and say the Southeast, we're in a food limited environment and cover rich. And Don, I think up here is in a cover limited environment, food rich. But what I've learned from Don and walking around the place, that's not everything. And so, yeah, you can generally figure out where deer are probably going to be on the landscape, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to screw it up by hunting it the wrong way. Yeah. And what I've been most impressed with is you look at the deer Don has killed, and you think, oh, he's one of these guys that he's got to hunt every single day to be able to kill that number of deer, that number of bucks, that class of bucks. And it's just the opposite, is that he's taking such extreme, everything is measured and intentional. Yep. There's no slop in his system whatsoever. Right. And so it's the wind, it's the time, every little thing is a strategy. And obviously it's paid off big. So it's just really a different way for me to look at managing the landscape, how to approach buck hunting, and then even more specifically where you're putting those stands, how to approach it. Don't you dare hunt a stand on a day when you shouldn't.
Yep.
Because that could ruin it for the whole year.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was the number one rule when, there's a few of us that have permission to hunt this property by ourselves, and that's probably a bigger rule than worrying about which buck to shoot in some cases, is making sure we're in the right spot at the right time. So we got one more question? You got another one? Yeah, we got time. Come on.
Alan from Ohio again. So we're allowed to bait and supplemental feed in Ohio, which I do supplemental feed with feeders. Every landowner that has 4 acres or an acre has 12 corn piles out there. For the deer that we're growing on our properties, they're getting used to the feeders. They're using the feeders. New deer moving in seem to avoid them. Is there some, would you still have corn piles, or would you eliminate all the corn piles and just have feeders? And I would love to get rid of baiting. So maybe a question for Bronson. What is the best way to go about to get something like that banned in a state?
I think the best way to go about it, well, you got to think about what got it there in the first place. And, well, I can't say that. I can't say that for Ohio. I can say for Mississippi and a lot of the South, it was hunter interest. It was hunters petitioning to their state wildlife agency or their DNR, and then over time, people just gradually allow it in. So there's just so much hunter support for doing it. I think it would probably take hunter support saying we don't want it anymore. And it's so fascinating when you do confidential surveys. I can ask you questions and nobody around you, your buddies don't know how you're going to answer it. And what we've seen in Mississippi is that about half these people don't want to do it. They don't like it. They're not for it. But we use the term, we bait defensively. So my neighbor's baiting, therefore I don't want to do this, but I feel like I've got to bait because my neighbor is baiting. And so I think it just, years after doing that and playing that game, a lot of people just lose support for it. But in terms of, trying to reduce it or have it eliminated, I mean, that is just literally getting support from the hunting public, petitioning to your state wildlife agency to not allow it.
Don, do you believe it's true that if you don't do it, you're at a disadvantage to your neighbor? Do you buy into that, or do you think it's an excuse that people like me use?
In Ohio, I think it's real. But I also think that based on my experience with, other hunters from Ohio, I think there's a lot more support to get rid of it than you realize. We was just at the show in Shipshewana, and I know at least 3 different people from Ohio asked me. I was actually asked to support it and to promote outlawing baiting in Ohio on this podcast. And I just felt like, not being from Ohio, it wasn't my place to stick my nose in that issue. If it was Illinois, it'd be a different story. But I think you got a lot more support than you realize. As far as pouring the feed on the ground versus a feeder, I owned a farm in Ohio until last summer, and then I just recently bought 2 more that we'll be managing for deer. I'm only going to feed in a feeder. You've probably seen the 3 new feeders that are sitting out here at the corner of the shed. They were just delivered by my daughter and son-in-law. Those are going to Ohio. I pretty much think you do have to compete with your neighbors. If I've got better things to do with my money and my time than filling feeders with feed, especially when there's plenty of feed around. But if your neighbors all around you are doing it, you're going to lose all your deer.
Yep. All right, so this will be the last question.
Hi, Jeff Lawton, Michigan, with Mike Belisle. Quick question. It's very common in our state free-range area that people say, well, you have to call that buck. And one of the things that I've heard and learned as we've been listening to the podcasts is to raise the average genetic of the whole group. The whole herd is going to raise. That's how you're going to get better deer. We on our property have a tendency to see bucks without brow tines. And this really is a question from setting expectation. Is it realistic that we could fundamentally alter that trait? Because what I hear you saying is in the genetic pool, it's there, and I probably don't have a high rate of success of thinking that I'm going to change that. I should probably set my expectation to have one of the nicest, absent brow tine bucks we can get, right? So I think I'm answering my question, but I just wanted to hear the comment about the idea of, well, if you can take that one out, it's gonna have an impact. But the pattern I've seen is we have a tendency where they're absent, and I just don't know that you could take enough out.
Yeah,
he's at the right place, isn't he?
Yeah. We're going to talk about that in depth tomorrow, but the short answer is no. I can't sit here and say it's impossible. It's virtually, practically impossible. And again, we'll get into the weeds about all of that tomorrow, but you just can't, by removing a few deer, change the genetics of the population in any way, shape, or form. And keep in mind that, those does are really important as well. And they don't have any indicator on them that they're going to have bucks with small antlers, medium-sized, or large antlers. So it is so remarkably inefficient to do that. I would counter by saying, is it nutrition? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not familiar with your property, but that's where I would start, because that is something I can do.
All right. That was a lot of good questions, and saving a lot of it'll help us steer a little bit of topics for who's in the audience tomorrow. But it's been awesome to be in front of another live crowd. We're going to do this again for the next 2 weeks. But Bronson, you're not going to be here. You're doing this 1 week. But I'm just going to flat out, I came up through my career through sales. You just asked for the order. Are you coming back next year and doing this again?
If Don will have me.
Well, I think that's a slam dunk, isn't it, Don?
Yeah, it's going to happen for sure.
Yeah.
Well, we really enjoyed having you. We look forward to all the attendees of this class being able to learn from you tomorrow. And we'll be back next week for episode 109 with next weekend's crowd. You got any closing comments there, Don? Or maybe your grandson does over there? You got anything you want to say?
What?
Nah, he doesn't have anything. Well, our sponsors play a huge role not only in supporting the podcast, but supporting the customers that you have for your consulting groups and also for these master classes. So tomorrow, to open up the presentation, we're going to be handing a book out to all the attendees of the class here and going over different ways they can save money from all of our sponsors. And Quiet Cat sent some demo bikes down here. Yesterday we had people running them out through the cornfield and trying them out. Osseo Gear has some samples of their new camo here. But without their support, it's really hard for us to get this network, but most of all, giving cost savings back to the people who show up for these classes or bring you on their property.
Yeah, we absolutely try to support those who support us. So that's just one way we do it, is through our sponsors.
All right. Well, with that, we'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us.
God bless, everyone.
Chasing Giants has been brought to you by Osseo Camo, Buy a Farm Real Estate Company, 360 Hunting Blinds, Victory Chevrolet, Real World Wildlife Products, Matthews Archery, Novix Tree Stands, Gingerich Tree Farm, WildlifeFarming.com, Quiet Cat, and Vortex Optics. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode of Chasing Giants.